just found something that has a bigger mouth than me.
That's a
He's
solid.
always buzzing.
That was funny as fuck. I like that. Did you see him?
Lynn's picking away at him. First good one out of loft.
Get the roll on this bad boy. Creek, here we are.
I can make a living walking in the woods. You can bet I'm
Beauty.
sitting pretty good.
Upstate.
Catching swamp donkeys out here. Look at the size of this thing.
Freaking pig. Look at that.
Look at the mouth on that thing. That thing is freaking huge.
What is going on, guys? It's Nick from Long Island Freshwater Unfiltered, the same guy that runs the page for Surfcast in the Island. I'm assuming you guys clicked on this video because you're also a big freshwater guy like I was, or I am, I should say. That was my roots. But neither here nor there. Today's topic of discussion is beginnings. Where it all began, why it began. A very famous quote by Anonymous, because I don't know exactly who said it, but a journey of 1,000 miles has to begin with one step. And that one step into this realm of fishing and bending the rod has brought me to where I am now. It's been an ongoing journey, and how much you can embrace and endure through experiences between whether I'm fishing with one friend and over another friend and going with this one, going on the boat, so on and so forth. So now I'm gonna get into a little bit of the dialogue of how freshwater started for me and where I am now towards the end of the video. Okay, to start off, so the first type of fishing I really got into, it's gonna sound very cliche, especially for the age I was at the time, was a simple bobber and J-hook setup for bluegills and sunnies. We would dig up worms in the yard, put bread on a J-hook and catch those 7, 8, 9-inch sunfish out of a lot of the local ponds I still fish to this day. That was when I would say I was around 5 or 6. As I approached my early teens, yes, I did enjoy hopping from pond to pond, catching these smaller fish. I eventually got into the carp fishing as well, with the bread, and obviously anyone that knows and is familiar with carp fishing, corn is probably the most effective for carp, in my opinion. I've pulled the most carp using that. But neither here nor there. Some time went by, I'd say early teens, just about turning into my early teens, I found out about a fish called the largemouth bass. And that was a very exciting fish. So the person that I would give a lot of credit to that acted as a catalyst in terms of me getting into largemouth bass fishing is a young man now, I should say. He's not a kid anymore. I'm not a kid anymore. I'm 23 years old. He's 26, but it's pretty much a young man by the name of Dom Lamano. I met him and we crossed paths and developed a friendship, I'd say, when I was in late grammar school, early middle school, because I remember I was in, I should say more into middle school, because when I was 8th grade at the time, he was a sophomore, yes, because he's 2 years older, 2.5 years older than me. I was fishing Loft Pond one day. This is right when I got into largemouth fishing. I was very complacent with catching a lot of the bluegills and the smaller type fish, so I wanted to amp my game up. And I saw him just casting out into the water and getting fish after fish. And I went over, saw what he was using. It was what I now know is a Texas rigged tiny brush hog. And back in them days when we would fish a lot of the local ponds, like Lofts Pond and Baldwin, and back in the Grant Park days, which I'll shortly get into, anyone that was lucky enough to fish that time period knew how productive it was. But anyway, these soft plastics, anything Zoom, but that one in particular was just a killer. And then I remember I believe we did exchange numbers, and then a couple weeks went by, we fished a handful of times, and then it just became a regular thing. We would, whenever our schedules coincided, because we were both in school and, we had homework and other stuff going on, we would go fish. So he was the one that really exposed me to what bass fishing is. And yeah, pretty much from that onward, it was just an expansion and a growth of knowledge and how much we can endure throughout this journey we've been on ever since that day. But I'll get into further. So paralleling to the time period in which I met Dom, I also fished a lot of the local ponds that I fished with Dom, also with my dad at the time. And he would take me before the spawn, so we would pre-spawn fish for largemouth. And some of the bigger lakes, we would go to anyone that fished Big Hempstead back in the day, or South Pond knew how productive it was before, like just as those fish moved up in March and April. Slow rolling worms and spinner baits, you could not beat it. I mean, every single fish we were catching was between 2 and 3 pounds and upwards of that. Funny thing is, to this day, my biggest bass ever was still caught out of Upper Pond in Hempstead, weighing in at just under, just under 7 pounds. It was gigantic. I had it on a Mepps inline minnow spinner. A lot of big fish back in those days, and I'll get into also, like I've mentioned, paralleling the time I met Dom. This is I also give him a lot of credit that he introduced me to that whole group of people, that being Joe and Andrew, Luke. There's a lot of people that I met Sean through Andrew. I hope I'm not missing any names, but if I did, I apologize. As I'm saying this, whoever has fished with me, you know who you are, and that's considered the group that we've fished with for so long. Going forward, I would say the pond we fished the hardest, I'd say late middle school, early high school would have to be Grant. Grant would take the cake. That's really how I learned about bait behavior and big bass, because we caught more 2, 3, and 4. I've even seen 5s and 6s caught out of that pond. My biggest there period was probably about 4.5, 4 3/4. But yes, there are a lot of big fish taken in that time period. There's probably a 5-6 year window that we fished very good fishing. But yeah, we fished that lake pretty much every day we could, even twice a day, every day we could. And we just slammed big fish. Whether it was the bait pattern in the summer, the late summer, where they feed on the big bullfrogs, or they would, that pre-spawn, that post-spawn bite, I should say, when they would feed on the fry and the hatchlings. Deadly if you threw a 2-3 inch ripple shad storm. You guys know what I'm talking about. But a lot has changed from then, and that's what I'm gonna get into. I'd say after that 5-6 year period, it applies to a lot of the local ponds we fished, even Loft, when we used to get that really good spinnerbait bite, and it just dissipated. It's not what it used to be. And there's a lot of factors. Sandy played a big factor when that happened back in 2012, 2013 or so. And a lot of those lakes are overflowed, and a lot of those fish got displaced into areas where water usually doesn't fill up, and once it drained out, a lot of those fish died. That was a big factor. A lot of people fishing these lakes now is a big factor of pressuring these fish, mixed in the fact with cormorants, bird-like creatures that eat these fish. So there are a lot of factors to play into consideration, let alone, also dredging has been a very big problem for a lot of these local ponds. But as the fishing got harder from the bank and the population seemed to dissipate, I'd say I was in early college now, so I'd say my freshman year of college. Yeah. So it was like my freshman, sophomore year of college. We started to do more trips upstate to get away from a lot of the stuff on the island. And that's when he introduced me to smallmouth fishing, Dom, and that group of people. Um, and it was phenomenal. I love fishing up in Schoharie, the Wallkill. You go up and down the list. We've fished so many bodies of water, private ponds, public ponds, up in Rexmere, up on Newports. All those bodies of water were phenomenal for largemouth and smallmouth. Not every body had smallmouth. You had to fish the creeks for the smallmouth for the most part, but we would have 50, 60 fish days in the creek. Nothing big, biggest being 2.25 pounds, smallies. But that was very memorable. A new variation of fishing that was introduced into my style of fishing that I still love to do to this day. And we did a lot of creek fishing for those first 2 summers of when I was in college. But once I got more busy with my major and profession, it got a little more difficult to make those trips on a consistent basis. I started working more serious in my profession, like I said, but I was also hanging on to a bar job I had that I was working at since the end of my freshman going into my sophomore year. And things got busy, so I had to stay closer to the island. So I'd say end of college, end of my junior, beginning of my senior year, that's when we really started fishing on the boat. He said, hey, you really got to come out on the boat. You got to do this. Because he was doing a lot more than I was doing. I never did it, actually, for that matter. And I remember the first lake he took me on, and I caught my personal best on the boat. Like boat fish, not land fish, because my land fish was still giant out of Hempstead Lake. But I caught my personal best boat fish the first time I went on his boat, and it was Lake Ronkonkoma. And that was a very special day. And I think it was 2 weeks back, not 2 weeks, 2 trips back to back where me and him had 1/5, and it was just phenomenal. We had a bunch of smallies. When I say a bunch, we got just over a limit, because anyone that has fished Ronkonkoma, whether it's guys in the club or just doing it for recreational purposes, knows that it's a very tough lake. You go there, you're looking for 5 bites, and those 5 bites could be gigantic fish. So that's where we are now. The fishing has changed a lot. A lot of what I do now is not so much pond hopping, unless it's some of my private spots. I don't want to mention these spots. Everything else that I mentioned up until this point is public, and 99% of the people know about. But the handful of private spots that I do have that not many people know about, I like to keep those to myself, and because they still consistently produce. They fish like a boat lake would, pretty much. It's ridiculous. It's insane. But if I'm gonna do land fishing, it's gonna be those private spots for the most part in this day and age. If the fishing was still like it was back in the Grant days by the playground and all that, I would still dibble dabble in the land stuff, but I tend not to bother. I'm more of a boat guy. I'd say from where I stand now, I feel you learn a lot more on the boat, but that'll be a separate discussion for another video. This is more of an introductory of where I started and where I currently am now. But yeah, going forward, I want to get into tournaments now. I've never fished a tournament, but I know surf casting, like I talk about on my other channel, takes up a lot of my time, so it's gonna be a little bit of a challenge to fit that into my schedule, but something I definitely want to try on a competitive basis. But yeah, those are my goals for the next couple of years. I want to get into tournament fishing and fishing more on the boat and learning what I can. So if you like this video, please like, comment, subscribe.